and welcome to episode 18 of the Full Bottle Podcast. I'm your host, Gabby.
And I'm your host, Matt, and we're joining you from sunny Mildura today. Gab, it's been great to join you in person for an episode of the podcast.
That's right, Matt. You and a number of the other team members at Citrus Australia are here for the Tri-State Forums.
It's been a great week, hasn't it, Gabs? We've been across to Mildura, Loxton in South Australia and Griffith in New South Wales. So really doing a nice little roundup of the region, some great insights and updates for growers and industry members.
Yeah, I really enjoy doing the Tri-State Forums every year. And I like seeing the growers and, you know, you might not see them all year. They're pretty busy all year. And then this time of season's a good time to catch up with them. And
let's not sell it short, Gabs. You've been the star of the show this week with your social media masterclass you've been running everyone through. Yes,
I am the highlight of the Tri-State Forums this year. Lucky last, but hopefully I taught some growers some things they didn't know before.
Plenty of interest in your presentation, I can guarantee that, Gabs. It's a big episode this month, though, so why don't we get into it? Can you tell us about what we've got coming up?
Absolutely, Matt. For this episode, Matt's actually travelled to the Agri-Bio facility at La Trobe University's Bundoora campus to speak with Francesco Martoni. Francesco tells us about his work as a research and development scientist with Agriculture Victoria Research.
Francesco is a molecular entomologist with a passion for psyllids. Along with discussing his current role with AgVic, Francesco tells us about how he got into entomology as a university student in Italy, along with his deep love for long-distance running.
Anyway, let's get into it. It's going to be a great episode. Matt's taken the reins, so I hope you enjoy the chat with Francesco as much as we do. Let's get into it.
Well, Francesco, thanks for joining me today on the Full Bottle Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
No problem. We'll start today with our Fast Five. Now, as the name of this segment suggests, these are 5 quick questions to get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready to go?
Absolutely.
Can you start by telling us about your current role? Who do you work for and what do you do?
Fantastic. So I am a research scientist in entomology and I am based in Victoria working for the Victorian government in the Agriculture Victoria research team.
Absolutely. And can you tell us a little bit about what attracted you to a career in entomology and what was your pathway into this field?
Oh, well, this is a tough one. So I started studying at the university back in Italy. And one of the first lectures was about insects, and I just, fell in love, and I really, really like insects since then.
Absolutely. And you did just mention that you are from Italy. Whereabouts in Italy are you from?
I am indeed, yeah. You might have noticed my very strong Oxford accent. I am actually from the northern part of Italy, a very, very small town near Ravenna and Bologna. Very quick drive from Venice or Florence, lovely spot.
Bologna, beautiful. The food capital, I think, if I'm...
Oh, that's a great way to, start with me.
Absolutely. Can you tell us about some of your proudest achievements in your professional career to date?
Well, I have a few, certainly. I am really, really keen in understanding diversity and looking around for very small insects that often are sort of forgotten by everyone else. So I think my proudest achievements is describing species. I have described a few species to date, and it's very nice, to discover something that it has been sort of hidden in plain sight for many, many years.
Interesting. And outside of your work, what are your passions or interests?
I really like nature, just hiking around, walking again, looking for insects maybe on the side, but I also like reading and running. I am a long-distance runner.
So we're talking marathons?
Half marathons, and I'm training for a marathon right now, so yeah, we'll see. I'll be able to tell you in October.
Excellent. And what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given, either professionally or personally?
Well, I think it might sound obvious, but often, be yourself. I think that everyone has a treasure inside them, and even if that doesn't really seem to be what everybody else is doing or looking like, I think, be yourself is a great advice.
Absolutely, a nice one to finish our Fast Five on. Let's move into some questions about the project that you're currently working on. You've told us a little bit about your background in entomology. Can you now tell us about the project and the various parts to it?
Yeah, well, so I am actually across quite a number of different projects, but I think the main connections between them is trying to find novel ways to identify insects to advantage agriculture, but also surveillance and biosecurity. As we all know, insects come in all forms, sizes, and colors, and most of these are actually beneficial insects. You can think about pollinators, predator insects. They are often doing our job in helping nature and our crops. But obviously, most of the time when people think of insects, it's about something that is sort of more like a creepy crawlers or something that can be damaging to your garden and to your crops. So that's what we call pests. My task most of the time is try to identify pests and separate them from harmless native insects that are not damaging anything. And why are we doing this is because obviously a lot of money and time is spent every year, every month, every day to be able to tell if an insect can be a danger to your crop. If it is a danger, you have to fight it. You have to try to eliminate the danger, and sometimes that again is an activity that can be very expensive. You have to spray using pesticide, which obviously you have to buy first. So being able to identify these insects is the very first step. And we try to do this by using novel techniques, which can provide a faster means to identify something, and often without having to spray, for example, or spend an excessive amount of money, not only for the identification, but for the management as well.
And if we look at citrus in particular, why is this research important? And what benefits will it deliver to the industry?
Well, the citrus industry in Australia is quite a great example. So we have a number of pests that are obviously present in Australia, and any citrus grower immediately will think about a few of them always present or always popping up in their orchards. But we most importantly have a few species that we consider top pest priorities, that are exotic to Australia. They are not present in Australia at the moment, and obviously we don't want them here. In order to keep the situation as it stands, so to keep these exotic pest species outside of Australia, we need to be a bit smart. We need to, first of all, perfectly know what they look like. So the first time an incursion could happen, the first time one of these insects could reach our country, we immediately need to be able to identify it and know what to do to get rid of it. Two of these species in particular are psyllids, which is one of my areas of focus. So psyllids are very small hemipteran insects. They are very similar to aphids, if you know the kind. So very, very small, a few millimeters, not great flyers, although they do have wings and they like to jump around. And two of these species are exotic species that attack citrus. And outside of Australia, especially in the US, for example, some of these species have caused millions and millions of dollars of damages. The main issue with these two insects is that they can vector bacteria that are then damaging the citrus. So the psyllid itself, yes, it feeds on the plant by sucking the phloem, but that wouldn't be the worst part of it if it wasn't for the fact they are actually carrying this bacteria that can damage the plant heavily. So the fruits are impacted. Obviously, yeah, I'm sure you know what psyllids I'm talking about. It's the Asian citrus psyllid and the African citrus psyllid, and they are both vectoring this bacteria from a genus called Liberibacter. And just to make names more interesting, one of the issues with this is that they can cause what is called the Wang Long Bing disease, so the citrus greening. Citrus greening impacts the fruits, impacts the leaves, and this is a very big problem that we obviously don't want in Australia. So for the Australian citrus industry, the main priority is to keep these psyllids outside of Australia. Now, where my team and my job comes in is how easy is it to identify these psyllids, especially in a place like Australia? Well, it isn't super easy, mostly because Australia is considered a hotspot of biodiversity. This means the diversity of psyllids that are already present in Australia, and that they have always been here, many different species. We're talking in the hundreds. It's very exciting for a biologist and entomologist like me. Unfortunately, this means that it's hard to be sure that the psyllids you are looking at is not an exotic, and it is actually a harmless species that has always been around in Australia. If you add to this that we don't really know the exact number of species, we don't really know how many species we have, what they look like, every now and then you can imagine you get a new species popping up somewhere, and and it might look very, very similar to one of these exotic species. And this can create often a very scary situation where people can just walk in their garden and find a plant that normally has always been healthy, and now it's covered with these tiny insects. So yeah, obviously being alert and being always on the lookout, ensure there is nothing new in your orchard. That's a very good first step. But a lot of research is also necessary to try to understand, well, how many species we have, how dangerous some of these species could be. And what we are also looking into right now is try to understand, can some of these species that have always been in Australia and so far always been harmless, can they actually end up transmit the same dangerous bacteria for citrus in case, for example, of a future incursion of one of these exotic species? And this is why I think, our research is very important and incredibly intertwined with Citrus Australia.
Absolutely, yeah. It sounds like it's a pretty complex project, though. Can you tell us a little bit about how your research and your work is conducted and who is involved in this process?
Absolutely. So, well, let's start from the beginning, and the beginning is often the field. So our work focuses on collecting samples most of the time, and these samples are obviously collected thanks to the growers that allow us, and their properties allow us to set up some traps, and these traps are very helpful for us because obviously they cover not only a geographic area, but sometimes they cover time. So we will leave the traps in the field for weeks at a time, months at a time. And this way we are able substantially to pinpoint in time and in space area where these insects could fly around. We collect these insects and then we take them to the laboratory. Here in Bandura, north of Melbourne, we have the AgriBio facility, which is a great facility to start looking into the insect. And when I say into the insect, I mean DNA. What we do is we extract the DNA from the insects, and we use a couple techniques that are very exciting to me. I will tell you about this just in a second, but we get the DNA and we are able to compare the DNA between different species. A very exciting aspect, I think, is that all these techniques and technologies are constantly evolving, which means, for example, the DNA extraction we do doesn't require anymore to destroy the insects. We are actually using a non-destructive process, which means we get the DNA by just leaving the insect inside a warm, watery buffer, which means we get the DNA and we don't lose the sample. We can still go back and look at the sample if we want to try to identify again, if we want to compare the morphology, what it looks like with other psyllids. And now back to those techniques that we use here. Two of the main techniques we use are called barcoding and meta-barcoding. The barcoding technique is, as the name suggests, is very similar to the barcode you would find in a supermarket, for example. You are in the supermarket, you find a can of beans, and you want to know something more about it. Yes, you could have a very, very informative employee that knows everything about each and every product, but that's very hard to find. What you might find is a barcode reader. The barcode reader allows you to scan the barcode and immediately gives you information about the product you have at hand. Now, the barcoding sequencing of DNA works exactly in the same way. Instead of having a barcode on the product, we are using a very short fragment of DNA from the insect. And this fragment allows us to compare the DNA of that insect to the DNA of different insects and give us information about how different these species may be. Are we talking about different species? Are we talking about populations from the same species? This, for us, are very, very important information because obviously when you can identify a species, you know about its ecology, its biology, you know what the species is known for, you know what plants it may be associated with. In this case, specifically, we would be able, for example, through a barcoding technique to identify if the species is one of the exotic, dreaded pests that we don't want in Australia and immediately report them. Or if not, if it is a different species, maybe this barcoding technique could help us understand what plant it is associated with. Now, this technique has been around for the past 20 years, and now we sort of have invented something more, meta-barcoding. Meta-barcoding is, I like to define it as a barcoding on steroids. because it does exactly the same, but it allows you to actually analyze multiple samples at a time. Barcoding was great, but you had, imagine you have only one barcode reader and you have to scan each product, so each insect once. With metabarcoding, you can just have a bulk of insects, so for example a trap with even hundreds of specimens in the same trap. And the metabarcoding technique will allow you to get information on each and every different species present in the trap. As you can imagine, this is revolutionary. It can save time, which means it can save money. And if you are unsure if a pest is present in your crop, that can immediately bring you a result that is very definitive. It immediately tells you how many species you have, and if some of these can be dangerous species or not. So it is pretty revolutionary. And we are using this not only for citrus, but across many different industries, such as grains, for example. And it allows us, imagine this, not only to look for pests, but literally to look for anything that is present in your pot. It is not a targeted approach. It just sequences all the different DNAs that are present there. In the context of agriculture, this is very interesting. You are not getting only information on the pest, but also on beneficial insects. You could get information on what insects are eating your pest, what insects are helping your orchard being pollinated. And this brings you so much more information compared to just, the classic, is this a dangerous pest, yes or no. It can provide you information on beneficial insects that can actually help you avoid having to spray, for example, insecticides. If you do know that you have predators of your pest, or if you do know that you have parasitoids that can parasitize and kill your pest, you might start thinking about actually releasing this as a biological control instead of spending money in sometimes, unfortunately, dangerous pesticides.
So by the sound of it, metabarcoding is the way of the future.
Well, if you ask me, I might be a bit biased, but I think it is.
And I understand you've recently brought on a PhD student to help with your work.
That's correct. We have a very, very excited PhD student, Michael Edwards. And we are actually looking forward to start fieldwork just next week. His project is going to be very, very focused, but not just on laboratory techniques. Is going to be in the field, probably would say most of the time, lucky Michael, and going around through all the southeastern and northern part of the Australian coast looking for citrus orchards. So yeah, if you do have a citrus orchard, we might be very, very keen to come and have a look at your insects in it. Michael will use some of the techniques we have been focusing on here at AgriBio, and will look also at the diversity of bacteria inside the psyllids. So not just diversity on the number of insect species, but being able to look at the DNA of different bacteria inside the insect can allow us to understand how really some of these insects work. Because some of these bacteria, yes, we know are very dangerous for plants, but some other don't even get in contact with the plant. They are just bacteria inside the insect that help the insect process food and metabolize whatever they manage to ingest, which means these bacteria, called what we call symbionts, have a key role in making the insect survive. So you can probably tell that if the insect is not something we want in our orchard, understanding how the bacteria inside the insect work might be very, very useful for us in order to stop the insect or to make the insect not as much as a nuisance as it currently is.
Well, Francesco, that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining me on the Full Bottle Podcast.
Awesome, thank you.
Francesco is my favourite person in the world, and he really knows his stuff. Have you ever travelled to Italy before, Matt, by the way?
I have, Gabby. My mother is half Italian, so I've been there several times, including a trip to Bologna, which, as Francesco mentions, is near where he grew up. The food there is absolutely amazing, but you can probably guess that when it's the home of bolognese.
I love spag bowl. It's my favourite, except I get the canned, like Campbell's canned spaghetti sauce that has the meat already in it. And apparently that's really disgusting, but it's like my guilty pleasure.
Oh, I think the quality they offer up in Bologna is a little bit different to that.
It's probably
Gab.
insulting what I've just said. But along with Francesco today, we have another special guest with us this month, and that's Jessica Lai, the Citrus Biosecurity Manager here at Citrus Australia. Jess, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Gabs.
Well, Jess, we've just heard from Francesco. Can you tell us a little bit about his work and how it relates to the work Citrus Australia is doing in the biosecurity space?
Yes, of course. So as I've said on a previous podcast, we have our biosecurity program running and we do a lot of surveillance for psyllids in that program. Part of why Francesco's work is important to us is we get a lot of psyllids ending up on our sticky traps, and triaging those psyllids is not as easy as you would think. Some of those psyllids look very similar to exotic psyllid species, and Australia is in a position where we have a huge diversity of psyllids. I think over 400 species of psyllids and counting. I'm sure Francesco has found more during his time at AgriBio. So Francesco's work is going to help us do some identifications on the native psyllids that we get through, which is going to make it easier for us, if we get an exotic psyllid in the country, to do better surveillance, more effective surveillance, quicker surveillance. And in addition to that, there are instances of exotic pathogens, like the pathogen that causes HLB, to be carried by other insects. So we don't know if the psyllids that we have in the country could vector the pathogen. So if we were to get in the HLB disease without Asian citrusillid or African citrusillid, we're unsure if it could potentially spread based on the psyllids that we already have in the country. So we need to have a little bit more information about those psyllids to be sure about what we would deal with if we were to have an incursion.
I suppose when we think about the tangible benefits to the citrus growers and the wider industry here in Australia, it's just really keeping our shores safe.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, our best bet in terms of HLB and Asiatic citrusillid is early detection. So that frontline surveillance that we're doing, particularly in urban areas, that Citrus Watch is doing, but also governments, is going to be really, it's key to our preparedness. So we need to know as much as we can about the psyllids we have in the country already.
Interesting. Well, can you tell us about anything else that's coming up with the Citrus Watch team?
Yeah, sure. So we have a bit going on at the moment. So the urban biosecurity work has been ramping up over the last few years. We've been doing a lot of education and awareness with home gardeners living in big cities like Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane. And we have a new urban biosecurity coordinator starting in November. Her name is Jackie Mitchell. So we're very excited about her coming on board, and hopefully you can have a chat to her in the future on the podcast about what she's doing. We're coming to the end of our 5th trapping season under Citrus Watch, so we now have over 500 volunteers around the country contributing to our early detection surveillance every autumn and every spring. So that's been really good to get more people on board with the survey work. And we're preparing another study tour which will happen in March next year to California. So we'll be taking some biosecurity officers to California to learn about how they're containing Asian citrusillid over there.
Interesting. Well, March looks like it's shaping up to be a busy month for you, Jess, with the Biosecurity Symposium that we're hosting as part of the Australian Citrus Congress on the Sunshine Coast from the 6th and 7th of March. The Biosecurity Symposium will be held on the 5th of March, I should say. Can you tell us about this event and some of the speakers that you've lined up?
Yeah, so March is going to be a whirlwind for biosecurity work next year. The 5th of March, which is the Tuesday, just before the Congress, will be the Biosecurity Symposium. I'm very excited about the program we've lined up. We have speakers coming from China, Indonesia, Brazil, California and Florida to talk to us about how they're managing Huanglongbing disease overseas and some of the challenges that they've had, and hopefully we can gain some advice from them about how we can prepare for the disease, and if we can't eradicate it, if we were to get it, how we would best manage it. And within that symposium we also have some speakers from Australia talking about what we're doing in terms of rootstock trials for HLB tolerant rootstocks, graft transmissible disease work happening at EMAI, and we'll also have some speakers from government and Plant Health Australia talking about emergency response. So what happens if we get an exotic in the country?
That's pretty amazing. I'm so excited for everything that's going on with you and the work you're doing, Jess. Thanks very much for that overview. And as you've mentioned, we encourage all Citrus Australia members to circle the 5th and 7th of March 2024 on their calendar for the Australian Citrus Congress. The event combines our previous Market Outlook Forum and Citrus Technical Forum under a new annual event. The program will be focusing on themes of profitability and global competitiveness competitiveness.
It sure will, Gab. We hope to see as many growers at the event as possible, along with stakeholders from other parts of the citrus supply chain. It all kicks off actually on the 4th of March with an optional study tour to the Bundaberg region. Then we move down to the Sunshine Coast Resort on the 5th of March for the Biosecurity Symposium, Citrus Australia's AGM, and a welcome event. And then the two main Congress days are the 6th and 7th of March. So the Congress will include a full conference program and a trade show exhibition.
Going to the Citrus Technical Forum in 2021, I think it was the first time I've actually ever gone to Queensland, and the humidity knocked me over a fair bit. So, but I know it's lovely, so I'm keen to hit the sun and the sand, and we hope to see as many of you there possible. And for more information, visit the Citrus Australia website. We've created a dedicated section on the Congress. The link is in the show notes.
Absolutely, Gabs. Apart from that, I think we're done for another episode.
Don't forget to like and share and subscribe.
And remember to follow Citrus Australia on our social media, our Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X, the platform formerly known as Twitter.
Until next month, keep it juicy.
You.
Yo!
You!